Welcome, my fellow Americans. I'm Bill Lipinski. This is Two Guys on Politics. And here's my very good friend, Ray Hanania.
And I am Ray Hanania, and this is season 2, episode 15, November 16, 2023. Two Guys on Politics. We talk about a lot of great issues, and we appreciate all of you listening, either watching us on YouTube or downloading our audio podcast to your cell phone to find out what the reality is in terms of local and international politics. Bill, we got 3 great topics today. The first one, the growing power of the Chicago Teachers Union on education and their role of getting Brandon Johnson elected mayor. The other one is the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who met with President Joe Biden yesterday, and we'll talk about what they did and what kind of feelings we had after we saw them and what he said. And then third topic is, as you pointed this out, which I think was very observant, our new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, passed the measure to keep the government open. And as you pointed out, that's exactly what got the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, in trouble with the far right. But the far right didn't do anything to the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, and we'll analyze why that happened. But let's talk about the Chicago Teachers Union. Tell us about that.
Well, the Chicago Teachers Union has become, I believe, the most powerful political organization in the entire state of Illinois. Their hand-picked candidate, the individual they supported extremely enthusiastically, is now the mayor of Chicago. And there's no question he was their candidate. He's a former organizer for that union. I know for a fact that he was supported very, very enthusiastically by the Chicago Teachers Union. Now, since that happened, we were supposed to have elections in the very near future, I think next year, of an elected school board, which the Chicago Teachers Union had supported very, very strongly and got that passed down in the legislature in Springfield. Well, now that they have their hand-picked mayor, they don't seem to think it's necessary to have an elected school board. They're perfectly happy to have the new mayor of Chicago appoint all the members of the Chicago Board of Education, because I'm sure he will take all their recommendations of who should be on the board. So they're delaying the elected school board. They got their mayor in office, and now they have gone to Springfield and lobbied the governor and lobbied the House and the Senate to kill one of the best programs that was going on in the state of Illinois, the charter school program. There were 9,600 students participating in this. There's 12,000 on a waiting list. Charter program is the parents will have so much money and they could spend it at a private school, a religious school, or a public school, wherever they wanted to go. But the teachers union didn't like this competition, not only the local teachers union, but the international teachers union. So they managed to pressure the legislature and the governor into dropping that program and killing it. They would not even consider keeping the 9,600 people that are now on the program. They wanted it shut down immediately. So that's why I think we're so harmful.
Yeah, this makes me wonder whether the City Hall press room should be moved over to the Chicago Teachers Union headquarters, because now, as you point out, this is all about what the CTU wants. It has nothing to do what's good for the city of Chicago. We've had calls for an elected school board for years, to give the public representation in the schools, to take it away from the control of the unions, to take it away, from the sole control of the administrators, who are appointed by City Hall. And that's a terrible blow to the taxpayers. They have no voice in schools anymore if there's not going to be any elected school board. And I agree with you, the charter school program, some of the best schools are charter schools because they've been run like schools rather than pension platforms for school teachers. And I got nothing against, there are a lot of good school teachers, but the unions have made school teachers, their pay and benefits a priority over the education of the kids. You know, they do
Very
more
true.
to fight for the benefits of the teachers. And God bless them. I hope they get everything they want. But, you know, we're under restricted budgets. Everything comes out of the taxpayer pocket. And whose kids are being taught? Taxpayers. You know, their kids. And we have to pay more and more and get less and less. This seems like a bad thing to happen in the city of Chicago. You think, do you think that voters, I mean, we're stuck for 3 years, basically. We can't do
Correct.
anything, but do you think voters are going to feel this impact, and will there be change because of it, or are voters apathetic in the long run? You can punch them in the gut and they forget after a year.
Well, I think one problem is the news media has not really made that big of an issue out of this situation. And unless the news media would fire the people up and keep them fired up in regards to this situation, I don't think people will just say, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. I don't have any allies. We'll just have to sit here and take it. Only 35% of the students in the Chicago public school system read at grade level. 35% only. That's
higher than what it was when I was going to the public schools. That's higher than it was when I was in the public school. I was raised in the public school system through high school, you know, I almost finished high school in Chicago, but we ended up leaving. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't until I left that I actually got a good education. I mean, the Chicago public schools, they had a policy where if you weren't doing well, they pushed you to the side. And I remember when I was a kid in third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, and even eighth grade, where I would sit in the corner because my grades were D's and C's. I wasn't a great student. And I would be sitting with a couple of my friends. Most of them were minorities, Hispanics, African Americans. And the genius kids would get all the attention and all the support. And I didn't care, because as a child with a struggling through education, you don't see what's really happening to you. And both my parents worked, you know, very hard. They paid taxes to pay all the salaries and taxes for the schools. They just assumed I just was not a good student. They never looked at the school system because we never had a chance to talk about the school systems. Now we do. But nothing has changed, really. The schools are terrible.
Yes, that's absolutely true. The record proves it. They have been very poor for quite a long period of time. To me, the only way to really make education, the only way to improve it is by having the charter school program in every single state across this country, so that there will be competition between the private schools, the public schools, and the religious schools. Competition is what built this country into the world's greatest country. And I think we can do the same thing with our educational system, but we have to get going right now. And charter schools, to me, is the direction we should go in.
Do we have a waiver system where if I wanted to send if I lived in Chicago and wanted to send my kid to a Catholic school, for example, or a religious parochial school, don't I get a tax break or something? Don't I get a tax waiver to do that? Do they still have that program in the city?
That was part of this program. No, it's no longer.
So this has been eliminated as of now. Correct. As part of this program to get rid of the charter schools.
Right, and there will be no tax credit given. You can still donate to one of these scholarship funds that gives money for children who go to a private school or a Catholic school, but you no longer will get any credit on your taxes for that.
What's the ramification of something like this? If I were a parent in Chicago, we left a long time ago. I'm surprised there are people still living in Chicago, given the rising crime and the taxes and the lack of representation and the terrible leadership we've seen in the city over the last, I'd say, maybe 15 years. But This is going to chase families out of Chicago, won't it? The ones that have been sending their kids to charter schools. Why not go to the suburban community where the schools are better?
Well, if you can get in a suburban community, that's, most suburban communities, you have to live in that jurisdiction in order to go to their school.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They'll move, won't they? A lot of people are going to move to the suburbs.
Well, I think a lot of people have already moved because of the poor education that Chicago school system gives. It's such a poor education that the head of the Chicago Teachers Union sends her son to De La Salle, a Catholic high school.
Yeah, now, I didn't see them. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I don't see how she could be so tone deaf to do something like that, but she did.
Why don't they pass an amendment to this elimination of the charter school system and say that if you live in Chicago, your kids must go to the crappy Chicago schools, and maybe her kids would have to go there. I remember one of the stories that got me in trouble with Rich Daley. We talked about this on the Crisis Cast with our friend Tom Seraphin a number of weeks ago, and Lisa Druce. By the way, if people want to look that up, Bill and I were guests on there several weeks ago. But I mentioned that, Rich Daley and I am a big supporter of his. I wrote all those columns to help him get elected. And then when he gets elected, it just went south when I wrote this story about this, his deputy mayor for education, Lourdes Monteagudo, who I interviewed, and she told me, which I had recorded on a tape, that she would never send her kids to the Chicago public schools because they weren't good enough for her kids, and she was sending them to private schools in the suburbs. That's an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment for Daley. I don't see how that's not an embarrassment for Brandon Johnson today. Back then, there were a lot of news stories about it. I didn't read much about it in our news media today.
Well, I think that Brandon Johnson is so busy taking care of the illegal aliens that have been shipped up here from Texas and Arizona. He has very little time to worry about citizens of the city of Chicago.
Well, I know that's not one of our topics, but it should be, because I will say this, that it upsets me because he's not taking care of the illegal aliens and the migrants. What he's doing is making us in the suburbs and the rest of the state, he wants us to give he wants a state and the county to give Chicago money to cover the migrants that he wanted, that the officials in Chicago said they wanted. I didn't want to bring migrants in so easily. Let them go through the legal process the way every immigrant is supposed to go through legally, to be properly vetted and ensure that they have a productive, positive role in our country. But it was him. He did it. So he should pay for it. And the people of Chicago, they elected him. They should pay for it. But they're going to try to take it out of our money in the suburbs and out of the state, and make us pay for what they want to do. And I think that's wrong.
Well, I hope it's an issue when the governor runs for re-election. That's if he's not running for president at that time, because I think he's definitely interested in seeking the presidency. He's probably coming up with some ideas to try to get rid of good old Joe. But that's another story for another time.
Right.
Also.
Well, listen, our second topic, and by the way, before I leave this, I'm going to say, yeah, the media, they're bad. The mainstream media is bad. They don't cover the real issues. A lot of the media are very close to the education system. A lot of the journalists, they are close to them, to the unions. The newspapers are close to them. This is a business decision, not a news decision. So I don't believe they're going to be hard on the CTU when they should be. They should be pounding the president of the CTU for not having her kids in the Chicago school system the way we pounded Lourdes Monteagudo when Daley was the mayor back in 1992, I think it was. And why aren't we doing that back in 90, 91, 92? So I think the media is a problem. They're also a problem in the Middle East. I'll throw that in and I'll just end it right there. Our next topic, though, is we saw that President Joe Biden had a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. After Xi Jinping snubbed him earlier in the week, finally did meet with him. And honestly, I was mildly surprised by the positive tone that the Chinese leader presented in his remarks to the public during and after the meeting. It made me feel less, I'm still concerned about Chinese technology, the low wages that they pay people for these cheap garbage products that they ship here that we buy, but we're buying them. It's like a drug. But on the other hand, I don't feel this impending threat from him the way I feel for Vladimir Putin. That Putin's a terrible person. I believe he really is a threat, but Xi Jinping, I don't believe is as big of a threat as Putin is. How did you feel about the talk?
I felt about the same way as you did. I was very happy because I think a full-scale war between China and the United States would destroy both countries. Quite frankly, it may very well destroy the planet and be the end of the world. So I was very happy that they met. They both seemed to get along fairly well together. A big breakthrough is the premier is going to send us some pandas because they just recalled some of them that were over here. But he made a statement they were going to send some pandas here. Now, Joe Biden would like this issue between China and America to be as low key as possible because he's going to run for re-election shortly. And he's already got 2 wars going on. Ukraine in the Middle East. And you know how badly the situation is with the Middle East war. We got these demonstrations going on all over the place. And the American government is with Israel.
I think these protesters are big supporters of Biden who are gonna abandon him. He's gonna lose a lot of support.
I agree with that. So he would like him and the premier of China to get along very well together. The premier of China is in a problem having a lot of capital is being taken out of China because of their belligerent attitude over the last year and a half, 2 years. Now he seems to be changing course because he wants to have that foreign capital come back into his country because he's got a monumental problem, with his budget, with the real estate. They are having a very hard time keeping their operation above water in China at the present time. Now, to me, it's only a temporary situation. They ultimately will get it straightened out. But right now, he feels vulnerable. Biden feels vulnerable. Consequently, both of them are looking to come away from this summit as, we're getting along much better. We're going to work things out. The premier of China has said, this world is big enough for America and for China. There's no question about that. There's no reason that we should get ourselves involved in any kind of difficulties. I really think if we could somehow resolve the situation with Taiwan, that a lot of the tensions between the United States and China would really subside. But how we do that, I don't really know. I mean, we are stuck in that position and have been in that position since 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek retreated from the mainland, set up operations in Taiwan. But I'm happy with what I saw. I'm happy that they have reestablished the contact in the military. Now our military can call their military and say, listen, that rocket we just accidentally launched towards Peking, we didn't really mean it, so don't retaliate. And they can do the same thing when they send something against San Francisco. They can call up and say, we didn't mean that, that was an accident. Please don't retaliate. I'm being facetious, but that's what it's, if you have communication between our military, that can be, all of that stuff can be stopped. All of those concerns can be stopped.
And I also think that this could play internationally with the wars that are going on. China obviously is a big supporter of the Arabs. The United States is a big supporter of Israel. There's a possibility that China could lean on the United States to be fairer, just as the U.S. is leaning on China with regard to Russia and Ukraine to not empower Russia to be fairer to what's happening in Ukraine. If they were to pull China out of the Ukraine, or if China were to influence the U.S. enough over Israel, it just might bring those two conflicts to an end. rather than see him go on. But I was always worried that Putin was empowered by China in Ukraine because of the support he was getting from China. I wonder if there'll be a change.
What kind of support does he get from China other than lip service? Do you know?
Well, I mean, it's the perception of, you know, the oil that they need and the you know, economic transactions. You know, they're part of that BRICS, you know, group that meets now, which has now attracted much of the Arab world to be part of it. This is an economic forum that is going to compete with the United States and the Western economic forums. And I think it might even put pressure on. I heard that the European Union, you know, this would have been a major story had it not been for the Middle East. But I heard the European Union is going to accept Ukraine's application to be a member. That they're going to accept an application. I heard it from one of the Ukrainian parliament members announcing that, you know, that they've notified us that we can apply for membership and they're going to be accepted, which is not going to make Putin happy. But if China is not standing next to Russia, I think it makes it easier for Ukraine to win and to stand up. But again, the news media has shifted from one war to another war, which I think because to the media, this war in the Middle East is more important to them than the war that's taking place in Ukraine, because Ukraine raised up, it turned over rocks with a lot of dirt under those rocks, the relationships between Ukraine and Biden, the relationships between Russia and Trump, all those really kind of set the media off in a terrible direction. The Middle East has a unified, at least publicly, public stand, you know, for Israel, and it's easier for the media to deal with that topic and not get the pushback that they're getting on the Ukraine war with Russia.
Well, there certainly is a lot of demonstrations going on in this country. I'm amazed on behalf of the Palestinians. I cannot believe, frankly, that there is that much support in this country for the Palestinians. But obviously there must be, because they certainly continue to turn the people out. Now, a lot of the people are young. A lot of the people, I don't really think they know the issues, but they see, you know, Israel with their tanks and their planes, you know, knocking down all of these buildings in Gaza. I mean, I've talked about this before on our podcast. You know, Israel has to be very careful because if they are perceived by the world as going too far, they're going to lose the support of everyone other than the United States of America, because we'll be with them no matter what happens.
Correct.
But, you know, they've got to, you know, somehow they have to turn it around and get people to remember how this war started, the invasion of Hamas, you know, into Israel and what they did on that day. But that seems to be getting more and more lost in the shuffle. Now, you know, I would like to see a real ceasefire take place so we can get everybody out of Gaza that wants to get out of Gaza. So
if you were
in hospitals, go ahead.
If you were still in office in Congress, and if you said you'd like to see a ceasefire, Israel would have pummeled you with a mallet over your head for saying that, because Israel has great influence over Congress. The hundreds of millions they pour in to different member candidates and to stop candidates. But of course, I disagree a little bit, because I think this war has been going on long before October 7th. It's just that the media focused on October 7th and has ignored all the violence that has taken place before that. But that's not one of our topics. But I do think this meeting between
into that one, but let's slide out.
Well, I mean, listen, this is a major factor that is influencing and tearing this country apart. And I do see more and more people standing up for the Palestinians publicly. And it's just like during the Vietnam War, those videos that we're starting to see more and more on social media. TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese, plays more videos that show the Israelis killing civilians than any other social media. So if it were a confrontation between China and Joe Biden, you know, between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, I might have said that we would have seen an undercutting of TikTok and a banning of TikTok from this country, because TikTok is, in my opinion, the only free social media that we have in this country. Facebook censors a lot of the videos and media that's posted there, so you really don't get a good picture the way you do on TikTok. So that, I think, I don't know if it's because Xi Jinping is just being smart, and is this a strategy on his part, or is he sincere and genuine? If he's sincere and genuine, it's good for us long term, I think, overall, across the board.
Okay, can we move on to something else now?
Yes, Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House. You pointed this out. Why don't you explain it? I mean, there's a little hypocrisy there going on, isn't there?
Well, I am very, very happy and very surprised that Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, has put partisan politics aside and put together some legislation that will keep the government open. It passed the House of Representatives. It passed the House of Representatives with more Democratic votes than Republican votes. Now, I'm happy to see that he rose above the partisan politics that we've been living with in the House of Representatives for so many years. I believe he instead of being a Republican, he became an American, and he did what was best for this country. And he was even willing to do so, taking in an awful lot of Democratic votes and losing an awful lot of Republicans. Now, this is the same thing that McCarthy did, but unfortunately, McCarthy didn't have those real right-wing credentials that Johnson has. So the right-wingers in the Republican Party were willing to tolerate it from him because he should be their ideal speaker.
Let me get this straight. So when Kevin McCarthy was the Speaker of the House, 5 right-wing Republicans were able to oust him with the support of the Democrats. They couldn't do it without the Democrats. That more Democrats voted to oust Kevin McCarthy than Republicans. Let's be honest about it. It was the Democrats who took advantage of it and ousted Kevin McCarthy. Now, Gaetz is in the same position, but is less vocal about Mike Johnson, because Mike Johnson comes from his end of the right-wing political spectrum. And yet Mike Johnson reached out and got the Democrats again, this time to work with him to prevent the closure of the government, as McCarthy had done, which is what got him in trouble. Seems like there's a political hypocrisy. Was this really, maybe this is all about Kevin McCarthy and the fact that people didn't like him in his own party, that he was elected maybe reluctantly, Mike Johnson. And I think it's bad for this country, though, because Mike Johnson is a far right-wing, extremist. He's not a centrist, Republican. McCarthy I could have lived with some of his stuff. He seemed like he was more toward the center, but what does that say about where we're headed?
Well, I don't know. I was very concerned about Johnson when he first became Speaker, but the first thing he did was reach out to the Democrats to get the Democrats' help to keep the government open. I think this was a terrific thing for him to do, particularly underneath the circumstances where the last Republican Speaker did something like this, and they got rid of 5 people, got rid of him. But Johnson I think McCarthy's biggest problem really was the fact that in order to become Speaker, he had to promise so many different things to so many different factions of the Republican Party in the House that he could not possibly keep all of them happy, because some of them were contradictory. What one group of Republicans wanted, another group didn't want. But he somehow promised both sides they would get what they wanted. So there were a lot of people who were willing to jump on the bandwagon of those 5 real right-wingers and get rid of McCarthy.
Did Gaetz vote in favor of, do you know if Gaetz voted in favor of this move by Johnson and the Democrats to keep the government open?
I do not. No, I do not. I would assume not, because there were 98 votes against it. And I would assume that he and his fellow right-wingers, and they're more than right-wingers. I mean, they're I don't know what to call it, but they're beyond the right wing of the Republican Party.
Way far to the extreme. Yes, correct.
Absolutely.
All right. Mm-hmm. All right, Bill. Listen, Did you know? I didn't. If we'll probably hit the end of all these topics, but did you know your shirt is making a political statement with a black, white, and red stripe? That's the flag of Yemen, and a lot of Arab countries turn to that red, white, and black. Although I will say that Trinidad and Tobago also have a red, white, and black flag.
I want you to clearly understand it's red, white, and blue for the United States of America. Yes, it's blue.
Okay, it looks black in the image there. Okay, so we're going to blame this on the technology conspiracy to portray you in the wrong way, because behind you is your flag, and of course I don't challenge your love for this country at all, but I thought it was kind of interesting. All right, Bill, I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski, and until next time, I'm a fellow American.
And we will talk to everybody again. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Two Guys on Politics. We'll talk to you again. Bye-bye, everybody.